So let's now move on to another leading international organization in the space, UNODC. I'm going to now move to Fabrizio. Fabrizio, evidence-based research and technical support are essential in addressing the rapidly evolving threats, such as crypto-related crime. So how does UNODC support research and evidence generation in this area? And how does this work help shape policy responses? And could you share some concrete examples of research or analytical work that UNODC has conducted on crypto crime and explain how these findings have supported beneficiary countries in strengthening their responses?
Thank you so much, Vera, for the questions. And please allow me to thank OSCE and the Basel Institute for inviting UNODC to this webinar. And also to welcome all the participants. So good morning, afternoon, and evening to everybody connected. Linking back to what Erlin and Valentin mentioned before, I have to say that UNODC also supports that kind of efforts of fighting these criminal activities and terrorist organizations which are exploiting the use of virtual assets. So in terms of publications and research, there are several that have been published and made available to our member states, starting from several years ago. There are a few that I can mention, for example, which are more recent, starting from the work that UNODC has been doing in vulnerable regions, especially in Southeast Asia, in this framework where we have been observing and reporting on the evolution of criminal organizations which have established cyber scam compounds in the region, which have been affecting member states at global level. And in several forms, starting from the frauds which are they have been perpetrating, but also in relation to forced labor linked to human trafficking and trafficking of drugs, and also murders. So there are real transnational organized crime behind these issues. We have been reporting on that, and we have been reporting on how these criminal organizations have used in an increasingly way the virtual assets or cryptocurrencies in general for generating the proceeds, so taking the money from the victims, either victims of the scams or victims of human trafficking in forms of cryptocurrencies, but also for laundering fiat currency that they have generated from the same kind of activities. And we have been working on that together with the member states for them through the reports that we have published, so evidence-based research, for them to understand better the risks that they have been facing. And we have seen that the responses from the member states in that particular region have definitely improved throughout the years since the problem started now nearly a decade ago. So we have seen that as an impact. But at policy level, we also observe several impacts that we have with our work, particularly, again, with this kind of publications and research, because we see that translated also into UN instruments, which then facilitate the shaping of national legislations and regulatory approaches, which can help in preventing and also detecting these problems. To mention, for example, that through the recently adopted UN Convention on Cybercrime, for example, we have an expansion of the concept of criminal proceeds, which we have already seen in previous conventions, like the Convention on Corruption and the Convention on Transnational Organized Crime. But now, for the first time in a UN convention, we see that criminal proceeds should include also the forms in virtual assets, which was not mentioned before. So this expands, obviously, the mandate also for the United Nations to provide technical assistance, similarly to what the OSCE and other international organizations are providing. Other publications that we have recently made available focus on the convergence between corruption and cybercrime, where we have highlighted the weaknesses that corrupt offenders and criminal organizations are, let's say, exploiting for obtaining bribes or laundering corrupt benefits through the use of virtual assets. Other publications or other products that we have been helping in developing, one which is really worth to mention, which is also quite recent, is an issue paper that focuses on organized fraud. Because we have seen that frauds are evolving, linking back to the issues of the cyber scam compounds in Southeast Asia. We have seen that frauds are evolving. And the use of cryptocurrencies is becoming a major issue in this framework as well. And the publication of that paper on organized fraud has led to the recent organization of the Global Fraud Summit, where we have brought together quite an important number of member states, but also the private sector, including virtual asset service provider and blockchain analytical firms, to discuss on how public-private partnerships can better establish better frameworks for improving the detection, prevention, and responses to these issues. With this particular summit, which happened a few weeks ago, we have had very important outcomes, including toolkits or guidance for establishing effective public-private partnerships, which have been endorsed by several member states and the private sector as well, and also a call to action, which has seen also quite an important endorsement, which is expanding from time to time. So we see more countries and member states adopting or, let's say, approving this kind of call of actions. So we are optimistic in saying that there are positive responses in this. And since the UN, obviously, in the UN family, UNODC helps in addressing issues that put at risk security, peace, human rights, and development by looking at organized crime, issues related to drugs, terrorism, and corruption. We do help member states in shaping the discussions during the relevant meetings which happens within this framework. One example, recently we helped the heads of national law enforcement agencies, which is a subsidiary body of the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, where the UNODC is a secretariat. We helped in shaping the discussions on how virtual assets are being increasingly used by criminal organizations which are trafficking in drugs. And that's an aspect that is becoming obviously of major attention. And then in terms of collaboration with other international organizations and intergovernmental bodies, it's quite important to mention that we are observer to the Financial Action Task Force, and we obviously participate in discussions which relate to the use of virtual assets for money laundering purposes, terrorism financing, but also for the financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And this goes back to other very important UN instruments, which are a bit older than the UN Convention on Cybercrime, for example, the UN Convention on the Suppression of Financing of Terrorism, or UN Security Council resolutions, which are also embedded into the international standards, which are issued by the Financial Action Task Force. And we are observers also to Financial Action Task Force regional style bodies. So with that, obviously, we participate in developing projects for FATF and regional style bodies. And we basically help in understanding which major risks that the member states are exposed to, which include the issues related to virtual assets. And then based on that, we basically design our technical assistance similarly to what Erling said before. So we contextualized the help that we give to the member states. And with that, I have to say that we have seen that kind of improvement that I mentioned before with specific states which we have been helping in better understanding the risks, better developing frameworks, legislative frameworks, and regulatory approaches. And then obviously there is more that we do and we have been doing, but maybe we can address this later with questions from the participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fabrizio, for highlighting the important work of UNODC and especially some of the knowledge products. I think that they can all be found on the UNODC website, so those participants who are interested can check those out.